The movie begins with an epilogue of Darfur's conflict. It has been termed a genocide and the worst humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. Over 2.5 million civilians have been displaced, and the death toll has reached 400,000. As the scene shifts, we see 6 Western journalists take off to a small village in Darfur, Western Sudan. They are there under the escort of a squad of troops from the African Union peacekeeping mission. They will be conducting a full-scale interview with the villagers. On their journey, we see how dusty and poor the area is in terms of vegetation. However, that is not what bothers the journalists, but rather the sight they come across a few miles later. They encounter an abandoned area filled with human remains, victims of a terrorist militia group called the Janjaweed. The commander of the AU unit, Captain Jack Tabamki, informs them that this is a usual occurrence in the village, as nobody can stop these sponsored terrorist militias. The journalists are confused and skeptical about the whole situation, but take some pictures for evidence. After returning to their vehicle, they all remain silent due to the horrific sight they encounter. Once they arrive in the village in Darfur, the villagers welcome them beautifully and show them around. They are an organized community with generational customs and traditions. As with any African and Sudanese community, they live a decent life that is largely supported by livestock. However, once the journalists settle and start interviewing the villagers, it becomes clear that the situation is far more complicated than their lifestyle suggests. All of them have been victimized by the sponsored militia and can no longer bear it. One villager, a woman with a newborn baby, talks with one of the female journalists, while the male journalists engage with the children in the village. They give them food and snacks, and the children seem to enjoy the Westerners' approach despite their dire circumstances. Meanwhile, the village elder talks with the Nigerian commander, Captain Jack. With the help of a translator, they can communicate, and Jack asks how things are currently regarding the Janjaweed in the area. The elder tells him that they have destroyed the village and the surrounding areas. The elder also asks why the AU doesn't protect them, and why they just observe this genocide silently. Captain Jack explains to the elders that there is a mandate, and that they are unable to interfere. The elder isn't satisfied with the answer, but understands that Jack cannot help alone, so he pleads for more troops and international assistance. Later, another journalist interviews a man in his house. He tells him that the Janjaweed is a big problem for them, killing and raping the women and children, burning houses, and showing no mercy. Sometimes they even take the little boys to make them terrorists. Despite this, he mentions that they are unable to help themselves, and all they can do is rebuild what has been destroyed. The journalist asked him why they rebuild if the Janjaweed will come again and repeat the cycle. The man explains that life must go on, and they have to raise the remaining women and children. He has a wife and many children, so he emphasizes the terror the militia group has caused him. He even shows the journalist the history of his fathers and grandfathers. They sit with him and allow him to tell his history. The man tells them it's not easy to leave the village because his relatives, family, and all his history are there, so it's not that easy to leave it behind. The conflict with the Janjaweed has been ongoing since 1988. Before that, they lived together with the Janjaweed, who are mainly Arabs, while the villagers are Sudanese. Shortly after they coexisted, the Janjaweed started persecuting them in a genocidal campaign. He explains this and takes out a box full of old documents where his ancestors recorded the history between the Janjaweed and the Sudanese. He says it is not a war between Muslims, but rather Arabs against Africans. The Janjaweed do not consider them as brothers. The man is sad and desperate for the journalists to help them, but they can only proceed by telling their story to the world through the media. The journalist thanks the man and leaves the house. Outside, another female journalist interviews a woman who says she is 23 years old and doesn't remember a time when she had peace in the village. She starts to cry and reveals that her husband, mother, father, and all her relatives have been killed by the Janjaweed militia, and she has nobody to confide in. The journalist hugs her and tries to comfort her. Though she cannot relate, she assures the woman that she will make sure her story gets told and that the whole world will help her. Elsewhere, another journalist interviews another woman in her 20s who is equally broken. She explains that she was raped by the Janjaweed and doesn't know if she has AIDS. She says they rape all the women, and it's known that infection is inevitable. The journalist can only express his empathy and cannot do anything more. He concludes the interview, but the woman remains in pain. Later, when all the journalists have gathered the information they wanted, they prepare to depart for their camp. They bid farewell to all the villagers, assuring them that help will arrive soon. While on their way back, driving a few miles, Commander Jack spots the Janjaweed militia coming towards the village. They haven't arrived yet, but the dust rising in the distance indicates they will be there to destroy the village soon. He informs the journalist that these are the Janjaweed, and they all start to panic. They get out of the car to discuss how to save the villagers. After some hesitation, the journalist decides decide to return to the village and stand by the villagers, hoping the presence of Western media will deter the Janjaweed from attacking. Upon arriving back at the village, Commander Jack gathers the villagers and instructs them to stay in one place. Their plan isn't to fight, but to use the presence of the journalists to persuade the Janjaweed to move on to another village. However, not long after their discussion, the Janjaweed strikes and attack the village. Chaos ensues as the people try to save themselves, and now the Westerners are also in danger. One journalist is filming, another is taking pictures, but here the gun is the law, and no white people are guaranteed safety. The villagers know the drill and run to their hiding places. Commander Jack tries to calm the terrified journalists, some of whom want to go home, especially the photographer. When the leader of the Janjaweed arrives, he sees Jack and greets him. Initially, Jack is calm and explains that they are from the AU and have full permission to be there. However, the Janjaweed leader doesn't care about any international permits or the presence of Westerners and demands they leave immediately or become victims too. After much arguing, Jack decides they must leave. In the meantime, the woman with the newborn baby from earlier comes to one of the journalists and hands him the baby, pleading for him to take the baby to safety. He has no choice but to oblige. Meanwhile, the other journalists are angered by the leader's approach and demand justice. The leader, merciless as he is, shoots a random boy standing nearby to make his point. Everyone gets nervous, and Jack orders them to leave immediately or die with the villagers. Once Jack orders all the Westerners to enter the car and depart, the journalist holding the baby silently enters the back of the car. As they prepare to depart, one member of the Janjaweed hears the baby crying inside the vehicle. He demands the journalist get out of the car and check inside. At first, he thinks the baby belongs to the journalist, but once he picks it up and realizes it's an African baby, he drops it to the ground. The mother witnesses this, cries, and rushes to pick up her baby. Thankfully, he is not hurt much, and she runs with him. The journalists remain silent and take off without saying a word to the leader, fearing that all hell would break loose and the Janjaweed would kill them too. After they depart, the militia group starts their merciless act, killing the villagers. They shoot anyone in sight, killing the children and all the men. The women are assaulted and raped, and, as if that isn't enough, they are decapitated with machetes. This is a very tragic history that occurred, and seeing these villagers in complete terror is horrifying. The militia continues to persecute them, cutting off their legs after assaulting them and dropping and stepping on newborn babies in front of their mothers, whom they then kill immediately. It's a horrific scene, but meanwhile, we get a glimpse of the journalists on their way back. All of them know what is happening the moment they leave, but they are unable to help. They sit in silence except for the journalist who took the baby. He is touched and unsettled by the reality of this tragedy, so he demands to return, even if it's by himself. He feels he at least has to try to save one person. He asks Jack to give him his gun, but Commander Jack refuses. He tells him he will die like the villagers, but the journalist doesn't have a second thought about leaving like this. After a brief argument, Jack hands him his gun and wishes him luck. Another journalist, with some experience in fighting and shooting, decides to follow him. The two return to the village on foot while the others are obliged to go back to their camp. Commander Jack feels uneasy about betraying the people, but fears for his life. Even these two Western journalists have empathy for the Africans, so he feels like a coward for leaving them. He orders his men to take the others and joins the two journalists in returning to the village. In the meantime, the persecution continues in the village, and everyone's left dead. The leader lines up all the men he encounters and shoots them on the spot. His men are intent on harming the Africans. Shortly, we see the translator and the village elder lined up with other people. Despite their pleas to be spared, the leader and his men shoot them and end their lives. Later, we glimpse the man the journalist interviewed. By luck, he is still alive and rushes to hide his wife and kids behind a useless table. He then runs out to protect the villagers he encounters and finds children outside. After successfully hiding them, he brutally beats and kills a Janjaweed member attempting to rape a woman. Not long after, Commander Jack and the two Westerners arrive. They hide to avoid being spotted, and Jack asks them to cover him. He bravely enters the war-torn village, and the two follow slowly. Jack sees the Janjaweed lining up another batch of people to murder and starts shooting at any Janjaweed he can reach. He kills one or two, but the leader quickly notices the Westerners have returned. An open fire ensues, and both parties exchange gunshots. The leader becomes angry and determined to shoot the Nigerian commander Jack. He shoots Jack in the back while Jack is focusing on other men. Jack falls helplessly, and the leader approaches to finish him off. He tells Jack it's foolish for a monkey like him to think he can save the villagers from the Janjaweed, and then shoots him dead. Now the two Westerners, left alone to fight, approach the houses unspotted. They plan to find and save anyone they can, but they are not foolish enough to face off with the Janjaweed. While observing the village, the scene shifts back to the man who hid his family. Unfortunately, he finds them dead when he returns, murdered brutally. His His wife was raped, and his children were incapacitated with machetes. He mourns over their dead bodies. Elsewhere, the baby's mother has hidden her baby under a shelf, waiting to see what will happen. A Janjaweed member finds her, and she cries and begs for mercy. He doesn't see the baby yet, but shuts the door to assault the woman. He initiates the assault, but the Westerners spot them when they peek out the door. One of them shoots the Janjaweed member with rage and saves her life. The woman doesn't care about herself. She only rushes to see her baby. They protect her and exit the house. Elsewhere, the leader gathers the remaining children and confines them in a house. He then orders his men to burn the house down with the children inside, murdering them brutally. The children cry as the smoke fills the house, and we witness the murder. While all this is happening, the journalists decide to leave, saving the woman and her child. However, they get spotted by a Janjaweed member who shoots at them. One journalist manages to kill him, but the woman is left dead. Having no choice, the men pick up her baby and rush to their vehicle. The car is at a distance, so they have to run towards it. This is when the Janjaweed spot them running and shoot at the journalist carrying the baby. He falls, covering the baby from further gunshots, but he is unable to get up. He hands the baby to the other journalist, and when he tries to escape with the baby, the Janjaweed shoots him dead from behind. Now, with all hope gone, they both lay on the ground, one dead and one out of bullets to shoot the approaching Janjaweed. The surviving journalist is dragged back to the leader, who pours gas on him, intending to burn him alive despite his pleas. The merciless leader initially gives him a chance to apologize and inform the West that Darfur is now clean of Africans, but the journalist only shouts and doesn't respond. The leader brutally throws his cigarette at the man, initiating the fire that will burn him to death, and the Janjaweed leader shoots him dead to ease his pain. The movie ends as the Janjaweed militia sets fire to the remaining houses in the village, destroying any remaining history of the Sudanese Africans. No history is left behind, and the terrorist Arabs depart the area, celebrating in their vehicle. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.